The Hollywood rumor mill is churning. Not really, but we're going to talk about some potential additions to the Guardians from the West Coast anyway, and an ex-Indians late GM that still doesn't get enough credit to this day.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. On today's show, we got a lot to talk about, so let's just dive into former Cleveland Guardians great and draft pick Clayton McCullough.
Yeah, that's right. Probably a name, to be honest with you, that we should have had on our short list when we did our little discussion about guys we were interested in. Yeah.
I'm just being a jerk.
Guys we should have had. Yeah. Not that list. Although Craig Albanez maybe could have been on mine if we did it that way. Yeah, probably Clayton McCullough should have been a guy that you and I should have had included. I'm not sure how we overlooked him, but he's interviewed for
I think it was just because of
a couple of jobs.
Like, we were maybe focused on their hitting coach and things like that. So I think it was just he wasn't as big of a name.
Yeah, and he probably should have been. That's what I'm saying. He probably should have been a bigger name to talk about. Certainly the Guardians view it that way. Paul Hoynes, I know, and Fabian Ardia from The Athletic had said that the Guardians reportedly came away impressed when their interview with Clayton McCullough, according to a source. And, yeah, he's had interviews the last couple of off seasons. He's talked to the Giants in 2019. He's talked to the Mets before Buck Showalter got that job. And then he was a finalist for the Royals job before that went to Matt Cattaro. His dad, by the way, has spent a lifetime in baseball scouting. Howard McCullough, I think he's in, if he's not in the Scouting Hall of Fame, he is in some sort of minor league hall, some sort of Hall of Fame for scouts somewhere, because he's had quite a career bringing guys. I think he was the guy who signed Nomar Garciaparra for the Red Sox, but I digress. That's good for his dad, I guess. But no, Clayton McCullough seems really well liked by the Dodgers. Like I said, he's gotten pretty close to being interviewed before. You might wonder, like, okay, why hasn't this guy landed the last three opportunities? Because Sandy Alomar, we talk about him. He went through a lot of this early on and went through a lot of interviews and didn't land it, and nobody can understand why, and not really sure why. And now he's sort of, I guess, out of the running at this point in his career. McCullough, has been kind of a bridesmaid a couple of times too, as well, but does seem really liked by LA. I mean, I saw Freddie Freeman this year talk about how he never thought he'd have a 20 stolen base season in the majors, and he credited Clayton McCullough for that. He's been their first base coach for the last couple of years. I saw James Outman interview James Outman talking about how his outfield defense this year he credits solely to, not solely, but mostly to McCullough's help, because he was their field coordinator in the minors and worked with him and in the majors again. He was with the Dodgers for quite a few years. Was the minor league manager for the Blue Jays for several years, and there's a lot of connections too. Not only was he drafted by Cleveland back in 2002, he played a couple of years in the minors. Played in Lake County, actually, one of the first Lake County Captains teams.
22nd round draft pick, I think the AKA the Tim Herron round, right? Isn't that we decided? Right. Yeah.
Out of Eastern Carolina. So he played a couple years in the minors for Cleveland, didn't really go anywhere, but he was an ex-catcher, so there's always that. He is an ex-catcher. And
of course.
The thing I think is most interesting here, and the connection is, he was drafted here, so the organization does know him pretty well based on drafting him.
And in 2002. I mean, just as a quick point, so likely maybe he was a senior if he was so like just 2 years older.
He was drafted out of high school, so yeah.
Oh, he's not. East Carolina University is a high school in Greenville.
Well, I mean, he was drafted out of high school and didn't sign.
Oh, no, but he was drafted by Cleveland in 2002, so he's just 2 years older than me, likely, maybe even one. So he's about my age. He's relatively young.
He's 41. Yeah, he's pretty young.
No, he's 43.
The manager. Yeah, okay, 43. So he's pretty young in terms of managerial pursuits. And he's worked with Dave Roberts the last couple of years, and of course, Cleveland knows Dave Roberts very well. From he was drafted here as well. I don't know if they ever crossed paths. I can't remember. Do you remember when Dave Roberts was drafted? Because he was obviously a Cleveland draft pick as well. I don't know if they ever crossed paths in Cleveland, but he worked with Dave Roberts in L.A. Obviously, Cleveland knows
because they got him from the Tigers. So while he was drafted by Cleveland, he actually, I don't believe, did he sign? No, he didn't sign with Cleveland out of the draft.
He didn't sign. Okay.
No, he was that Geronimo Baroa trade, I want to say, in my mind, when they signed Geronimo Baroa, who was, I'm surprised I could pull that name out, but who was awful, and they shipped him out. So, but he came over to Cleveland in 98, and then he was out of Cleveland by 2001.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We know what kind of career.
No overlap.
Had as a player. Yeah. So, McCullough only reached the minors. I wasn't sure if Roberts had played in the minors with him, but either way. So he's worked with Roberts. Terry Francona, obviously good friends with Dave Roberts. He was his manager in Boston. They've been pretty close. So, again, Francona hasn't said like he's going to make a recommendation or anything, but he did say if they ask for if they ask for help, I'm certainly going to give them, I'm going to give them my opinion or whatever they ask for. I'll help out. If Dave Roberts thinks that Clayton McCullough can manage or thinks he's a good candidate, I'm sure he's going to pass that along to Francona. And if Cleveland asks Tito, what do you think of Clayton McCullough? And if he says, hey, my buddy Dave Roberts says good candidate, and I'm sure that's already part of why he got the interview in the first place. So it's probably already happened, but there's some connections there between being drafted there and obviously a connection with Dave Roberts and Tito. So I think he might end up being on the short list here. I would not be surprised if he ends up on the short list.
And with that Dodgers team, we talked about trying to mine the Braves because of hitting, but I mean, look at that Dodgers team. They helped Jason Hayward turn it around. James Outman wasn't exactly a huge prospect. Trace Thompson, we talked about like his surprise rise. So if he is a guy who also helps with the hitting, that could be a big net positive. Just don't give him the nickname Hat and we'll be okay. You can mark in the comments below what I'm referencing with that. But, he's an interesting candidate, younger player, hasn't really coached here, but does have the ties of having been a minor league player for Cleveland in the lower levels. He makes sense on the short list. I'm curious to see, it looks like nothing came out about who I thought my candidate would be. We haven't heard anything about Bobby M, so I assume he's not, even though with his ties. So we'll have to see. I feel like they're going to sit there and, we'll probably still hear some names, but I think you can definitely put him on that short list in terms of guys. So I think, we didn't hear anything after Mendoza and Alvarez. Nothing else came out. So I think you can kind of move them to one column and move him to another.
Yeah. I would say McCullough is probably the biggest name at this point, truthfully, and who they've interviewed. Like you've had some other coaching names, and they've talked about some internal candidates as well that they've talked to. Obviously, talking to Valleca and some other minor league guys. Reportedly, there's been the reports are kind of conflicting on the whole Budzinski thing and Snicker and all that stuff we talked about last week. But I don't know. McCullough seems to make a lot of sense. The Dodgers do a lot of things well. I mean, that's a good place to learn. I know there's a lot of Dodgers fans out there that don't love Dave Roberts, but he's well liked around the league, and the Dodgers have been good. I mean, year in and year out. I know people will say that's because they spend a lot of money. They do spend a lot of money, but they're also a really smart organization. They balance things very well. This is an organization that hires well, they draft well, they develop very well. They develop in places that are hard to develop. Like they find guys, and this is maybe not McCullough specific, but it just speaks to his ability to kind of be around those people and soak up what they know. Because that's a big part of this. It's not just coming in and it's what you know, it's what you can learn. And if he's learned from them, like you talked about reviving Jason Hayward as a bit player this year, and the guys they develop, they spend a lot of money, and they draft. They never draft high. They're always winning. They never draft high.
They often do weird draft too. Like if we're being fair,
like I said, they develop from weird places.
Tony Gonsolin was
very unorthodox stuff. Yeah,
was a 5K senior sign. That's. But again, that's not necessarily him. But just looking at the team,
but if you can learn from those kind of people, and
but even just looking what they've done with, Chris Taylor was not Chris Taylor before he got to the Dodgers. Now he kind of did that, I think, before McCullough was there. But you can look at the Dodgers and their history. Yes, they do spend a lot of money, but they're not also the team. They're also a team that's trying to balance that to some degree, and it has certainly helped with having Freeman and Betts and being able to trade. But Will Smith was, in my opinion, an overdraft. I'll be part, if I'm going to take credit when I get it right.
He's a really good player.
He's really good. At the time, I thought it was a bit of an overdraft. I'm just going to call James Outman was not someone I had the expectation for what he did this year. I really liked Michael Vargas. We'll talk maybe some other stuff when we talk about the Dodgers in segment 3, but they've done a really good job of kind of finding, and not just with those young guys. Yes, we could talk about all their draft successes, but Yancy Almonte, cast off from the Rockies, like that their whole bullpen
tons
is
of cast off
pitchers.
pitchers they revived.
And hitters, Max Muncy was, people forget this, a cast off from Oakland when he got there. Like this is a team that has developed cast offs really well, and I would be excited to add that if he ends up being the candidate, someone who's been around that and maybe could bring some new thoughts.
Yeah, if you can bring some of that Dodger innovation over here would be really good. And Dave Roberts works really well with, I know people are going to say, oh, you don't want a manager doing too many analytics, but Dave Roberts really balances a lot of those things. So we'll talk a lot more about Dodger stuff. First, I want to give a guy his due who was up for a Hall of Fame that has been overlooked here in Cleveland. So we'll talk about him here in just a second. If there's any event coming to town in Cleveland or out of town, and you're looking for tickets or you're not sure about how to go about your ticket search, you don't need to go out and make that purchase well ahead of time. You can wait till the last minute with the Gametime app. There's a lot of events coming to Cleveland, to be honest with you. My next month's calendar is filled up with events that I'll be going to with my wife. If you want tickets to any of those events, whether they're concerts, sporting events, comedy shows, a lot of those coming to Cleveland, I can tell you. Go to Gametime because they have deals on tickets right at the start of the event, even an hour after it starts. A place to go to get last minute seats, and you can get pictures of your seats before you buy them, so you have that idea of what your seat's going to look like before you go. And with the Gametime guarantee, you're always going to get the best price. So if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime is going to credit you 110% of the difference. So take out all that guesswork with buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Go ahead and create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. The championship series are wrapping up. We're going to be getting very close to World Series time this week. I think Friday is the start of the World Series, so stay tuned and make sure you're listening to all that action on your SiriusXM app. Just search for the game on there. Hank Peters, Jeff, I know you had some thoughts on him over the weekend. He is up for, I forget what they're calling the committees these days. They keep changing the name of how these committees work or what the names are of them. But Hank Peters was the Indians GM and president and their chief operating officer in the late 80s and early 90s so it was 87 to 90s when he worked here. And he also, before coming to Cleveland, did a lot of great work with the Orioles.
Yeah, he was born in Cleveland originally. Yeah,
born in Cleveland, served in World War II, I think, as well. Yep. So very interesting background. He passed away back in 2015, so this would be a posthumous induction to the Hall of Fame for him, but probably a very deserved one. And also in Cleveland, probably does not get his due here. I know there are more people who have recognized this over the years, but I think as a whole, there are people who just don't realize how instrumental Hank Peters was for the Cleveland organization, especially coming off of just at the end of where they were starting to break out of those doldrums from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s.
Well, one of the big things you have to say is when you're talking about Cleveland's GM history is, after Frank Lane in 61, you had Gabe Paul from 61 to 73.
Trader Lane.
Was just Trader Lane, who, helped that team be solid. But then Gabe Paul was pretty much an unmitigated disaster for most of his run. And then you have this weird thing where Phil Segui comes in from 73 to 85. And I don't even think he got to 500 one of those years. And he had a 12-year run and was never fired. He moved to president of baseball operations for Joe Klein to take over for 2 years and just be pretty awful in that role. It was bad. He got canned after that infamous Sports Illustrated issue. But hey, his, and Phil Segui, his big thing was essentially appointing Frank Robinson as the first African-American manager. In that, it was terrible. He was not good in Cleveland. But yeah, he became a senior player personnel advisor, somehow 12 years, all below 500. Good old days of baseball, right? Hank Peters comes in, and after helping guide very successful runs with Baltimore, comes back home. He's 87-91. And outside of Albert Bell, who is, you can thank Joe Klein. That's the one success piece there from Joe Klein. That 90s team is, and Kenny Lofton was the trade for Eddie Toppensee, was a John Hart special. But other than that, John Hart gets a lot of credit for the 90s Cleveland Indians, and he didn't put those teams together. Yeah, he went and signed Dennis Martinez. He went and signed Oral Hershiser, and those are important moves. He traded for Kenny Lofton, but outside of that, almost every single one of his other trades was an unmitigated disaster.
Especially after the mid-90s.
Yeah, and in fairness, like his second best trade is probably Dave Burba for Sean Casey, and people have talked about why we shouldn't trade with Cincy. That Burba trade was instrumental to this team keeping the window open, but that is his second most successful trade. After that, you can look at the Burnitz deals, the Sexton deals, the Giles deal, like, and it's all terrible. Like what a long time ago when it was Indians Prospect Insider, I analyzed every single round of the draft and wrote, I wish like there was a maybe internet archive, and I found like the best pick in every single round. And then I went through and did a whole piece about like the best and worst GMs. So when it comes to the draft, Hart and Shapiro were the worst in the 50 years of the draft. They were both awful. And basically the one thing Hart was really good at is, for the most part, he, outside of Blackjack McDowell, he did not swing and miss on free agents. He was pretty smart with that. So there is some value there, but
Peters was the reason this all went in the right direction.
So, but that's the thing. If there is no Hank Peters, guess what? When John Hart gets here,
the window doesn't open.
No, there is no window. This team doesn't find success, and John Hart is probably out of a job within 5 years. And they're probably moving on to something else. That he inherited all that talent. And then one can argue it's like the 1992 draft was John Hart's first one at the heel. And I believe that is that the mark they had, no, that's the Paul Shuey.
It was 92, Paul Shuey.
Yeah. Paul, who was a reliever. I mean, they have the number 2 overall pick in the class, and they take a reliever out of UNC. It's still one of the weirdest picks ever. That's how John, so he had some high picks. That one was not great.
Hank Peters didn't miss like that.
Hank, I mean, no, but that's the thing. It's like we saw that, like, even when Hart had, like, you could argue that, okay, if someone's going to argue, hey, Hart never had he had high picks and it didn't work out. Peters set this team up to be successful. The 90s teams were Hank Peters teams. They were not the John Hart teams. As much as people sit there, John Hart in the 90s, no, you have it wrong. It's Hank Peters and the 90s Indians. It is Hank Peters who put that core together. It is Peters who drafted Tomey, Giles, Ramirez, Nagy.
Traded for Alomar.
Traded for Alomar. Traded for Baerga. Like, all of that was Hank Peters. All of that. And
I think he was the reason that they started handing out pre-arb deals as well. Yeah. That was kind of his thing. They were starting to make, those contracts you saw where they were signing guys for that arbitration to long-term deals where you're paying more money up front, but you're getting some free agent years on the back end. That's how Cleveland kept the core going, because they kept guys like, they traded Lofton, got him back, but Tomey, Ramirez, all those guys did sign their first contract and got a couple of years of free agency bought out by Cleveland. And that is a practice that everybody tries to use today. And it's a practice that Cleveland has always used because that's what they've always had to do or always done. And a lot of that does go back to Hank Peters and his philosophy as well. So a lot of things you see innovated around baseball and in Cleveland had a lot to do with Hank Peters. And I think you're right. A lot of people think that John Hart was the reason. And John Hart did some good things. I'm not saying he was a terrible GM. Like you said, he kept the window going. They were still fine. The drafts were terrible for the most part.
Trades were terrible.
Yeah, Hank Peters set the foundation for this organization to almost to where they are today, truthfully. Because if Hank Peters doesn't do what he did, what happens to the 90s Indians? Because you don't have Tomey, you don't have Ramirez. No. Yeah. And then what foundation do they have to build off from the 90s? That's what the entire right now the organization is built off of, is that 90s foundation. They have a strong history going back to the 50s, but this is a different time. The baseball started to change, and you could argue without Peters' foundation, this organization, is in a very different situation right now. They might have never had that success to build off of. The new ballpark, I mean, they might still get the new ballpark, but you don't have the excitement of a good team with that new ballpark, and maybe this thing never takes off,
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's just this. There's this tendency for a lot of times to really lionize Hart, and one can make an argument that if they had another GM, they might have won a World Series because of how bad the trades were, because of how bad the drafting was. Yes, he drafted CC, and Jared Wright kind of worked out.
Bartolo,
but but it's like
Bartolo, you got to give him credit for Cologne because Shapiro traded Cologne, but they had Cologne to trade, and that also set a major foundation for them the next couple years. I'll give Hart credit for this, by the way. The Kenny Lofton situation in '96 when they're 97, they traded him in spring training to get Marquise Grissom and David Justice. That was a big part of them going to the World Series that year. And then they also got Kenny Lofton back, and they still retained David Justice. So that helped them for a couple of years as well.
Grissom helped them. Grissom was part of the Matt Williams deal, was he not? Was that how that worked out?
That I don't know about. I mean,
maybe it's part of a lesser deal, but either way, it's like, they did. It's just the humorous thing of Atlanta wanted to save money and wanted to get, because David Justice. We'll have time for another day. I recently went down David Justice wormhole. He was already like 32 and had a lot of outstanding. Like that deal was about Atlanta dropping Justice's contract. As much as it was as getting a player, it worked out great for Cleveland. He was great for the rest of that contract. But that was a big part of it for them, was dropping his contract. But and like I said, I probably coming off too rough on Hart. That you can look at his runs after he left Cleveland to see it didn't go very well when you didn't have that Hank Peters, whole situation put into place.
Right.
But it's like the 90s teams are not John Hart's teams. They're Hank Peters teams. And the 90s, Cleveland was one of the best offenses ever. And it did spoil a lot of fans, I think, in Cleveland to a degree, because if Albert Bell was a nice guy instead of a jerk, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. You had 4 or 5 Hall of Fame level players on that team, and that just doesn't come around. So it was a fantastic run. We should recognize that we were just, unbelievable time, but also realize that, a lot of those pieces were inherited, and that Hank Peters should. And by the way, it's not just Cleveland. He won the 1983 World Series with Baltimore. He led that team to the top. So absolutely, for multiple reasons, Hank Peters should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, good candidate for the Hall of Fame. He should get his due. Let's see if the Guardians can make some other very good trades this offseason.
October baseball is back. Currently, we got the Texas Rangers beating the Houston Astros 4-2 in the 8th inning. I am rooting for Texas in that series, but
always for Game 7s.
You can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join today, and it'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to create your account today. Then get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a win, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockdown right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Right now, if I was going to do a bonus bet for this game, could I do a bonus bet that Jose Leclerc is going to get the save? He's gonna rebound. He's had some rough runs in the past, and he's recovered from it. So I got faith in him. That's my bonus bet. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
If there is a Game 7 for the ALCS, you can find it on your Sirius XM app. Just search for the teams. And we know there's a Game 6 coming up on Monday between the Phillies and the Diamondbacks. That should be a lot of fun. Philadelphia is crazy fun right now, and I still want to see all the Game 7s possible.
Okay. Before we move into the trade, I just want to throw one thing out. So the 1989 draft, I've mentioned this before, greatest draft in Guardians history. It's also the draft of first baseman. Jeff Bagwell, Jim Thome, Frank Thomas, John Olerud, Mo Vaughn, JT Snow, all taken in that draft.
Wow.
Ryan Klesko as well. Number 1 player by WAR is Jeff Bagwell. Number 3 player, Jim Thome. Number 6, Brian Giles. If you go down this list, sitting in the early 20s is Curtis Lekancic at 22. Eddie Guardado 1 spot ahead. Lekancic 1 spot ahead of JT Snow. Lekancic was also a Guardians pick in that draft. They flipped him. Give some credit to John Hart. That was him. He flipped Lekancic and another piece for Paul Sorrento, and that worked out pretty well as well. but 3 of the top 21 players and 2 of the top 6 in a draft that is just, I mean, Trevor Hoffman is 9th. Mo Vaughn is 10th for WAR. Like, that's how good this draft is. So just wanted to throw that out for some fun. I have this all saved in a document. Comment below if you want me to share that out, and I'll share it out in the comments or through Twitter. Let's
see if Cleveland can maybe pick they're going to bring Clayton McCullough over. Maybe they can bring one of his hitting proteges over, or some of the minors he's worked with. So there was a report from I think it was last week or 2 weeks. So we've been sitting on this topic for a while.
Yeah.
The Dodgers, their post season press conference, they're kind of the post-mortem season conference with the GM and the media and all that. They talked about the need to go up for starting pitching this offseason. No shock. Everybody's going to say that. Everybody needs starting pitching. No one's going into the winter saying we've got enough starting pitching. We don't need to go after any starting pitching this offseason. Nobody's saying that.
I mean, on roster resource, again, not a perfect site, but they're starting 5. Walker Buehler, who missed all of last year with injuries, Bobby Miller, Ryan Pepiot, who could not nail down a job this year for them, even though they had need, Ryan Yarborough, who I believe is 63, and Emmett Shaheen, who again is a interesting young arm, especially with the Julio Urias situation. I don't know if he's going to pitch again. Lance Lynn is going to be a free agent.
Yeah.
And does
young guys too,
Clayton
along the way
retire?
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen with Clayton Kershaw. Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin had arm surgeries. They've got some guys in the minors that are interesting. Gavin Stone and Kyle Hurt as well.
Yeah, if they want to, surgery the Dodgers want
September,
so he's done for next year.
If the Dodgers want to continue the run and they want to be the class of the NL West every year, they definitely need starting pitching. I don't know. This is a team that feels like would be interested in Shane Bieber because they have taken on. I mean, the Noah Syndergaard thing obviously didn't work out for them, but they've done. Noah Syndergaard was kind of on his way to being broken before he got there. But
he had a good year with the Angels. Yeah, and he was good with Philadelphia. I think that was just something broke this year with him.
Shane Bieber seems like their kind of guy. Like, I think they would be fine working with him for a year, seeing if they can maybe help him regain some lost velocity.
The one thing I would say is they have Syndergaard had been healthy before he got there. They've avoided the health guys outside of the guys that they have themselves. Yeah. If you go and you add like the free agency guys, they've got Trevor Bauer, who is, there's a lot of things you can say, but the one positive about him relative to all things is that guy was relatively healthy. Like, he was a consistent starter. I wonder if on some level, if Bieber wouldn't be their guy because of I think Bieber's value is going to be severely dinged because, again, 2 of the last 3 years he didn't pitch. That's a big deal. That is a big deal.
It is, and the Dodgers do need healthy arms. That's true because Walker Buehler's coming off of arm surgery. Like, the only guy in their rotation, they have 2 guys, maybe like 3 guys. The only guy in the rotation that's been really healthy is Miller. You have no idea.
He's a rookie who was 120 innings this year.
Yeah, you have no idea what Pepiot is going to do. Yeah. And Yarborough, he's just a dude. Like, he's maybe
89 innings last year. Like, again,
it's not an option now. Yeah, not an option they're going to consider if they want to win the AL West. I mean, if Shane Bieber's not their guy, I mean, I'm sure I'm curious to see if they'd have any interest in Cal Quantrill as well.
I think he might. I think either would make sense. Like, as much as I'm crapping on Bieber, there is a degree of logic of rolling the dice on him and buying low. But I think there is value in Quantrill and his relative strong health.
I think Bieber's going to attract interest too because of they're going to see if Cleveland has any interest in moving him now, but also because anybody that gets him this offseason can offer him the qualifying offer next year if things go well. So teams are going to be very interested in making that happen. And there are guys in the Dodgers organization, as we're sort of running out of time on this episode, but there are guys we really like. You like Michael Busch. I'm going to mention Andy Pages, even though he strikes out too much. And
I just don't think he can play outfield.
I know he can't. I know he can't play outfield. I saw him play.
Manzardo and Naylor kind of blocks him. I just want to throw out this with the Busch. I put together a list of AAA players with isolated powers greater than 2, K rates under 24, runs created plus over 100. And Michael Busch is one of 3 with Blaine Krim, who is a kind of one of those guys that if you're a bad team would be worth checking out with Texas, and then Jonathan Aranda in Tampa. But that's your entire list. I know Busch wasn't great in the minors, but even if you go and you look at some additional data, when I was trying to look at guys who also pull the ball a lot, because we know that pulling the ball is a good thing. It has a much higher, he was also on that list. And we'll get into some of those other guys this year.
Busch has plenty of power. I don't know where he plays. That's the problem. He's probably an outfielder.
Left field.
Yeah, you could probably put him in left. He's played second or played some second and third in the minors. He's left-handed. Like, I don't know if you worry about lefty or righty because you're just trying to get the best hitter you can in this kind of deal. So Bush is really interesting. And then there were people who thought that Cleveland would go with Bush in the draft in 2019. There were a lot of places.
Well, I thought they'd take Gunnar Henderson, but I did Michael Bush in my shadow draft.
Yeah, I saw a lot of places that mocked Michael Bush to Cleveland in 2019. So he's interesting. I like Miguel Vargas a lot. He doesn't have the power that Bush does, but he is a good hitter. He walks plenty, doesn't strike out. I think he can grow into power because he's already had double-digit homers in the minors. I really like his swing. I think he can hit. Another guy who probably has to move the outfield. Maybe he's played some second. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case here unless you move Jimenez to short or you move Brito to left field, all that kind of stuff. I do like Juan Brito, by the way, in case anybody's listening who thinks I don't like Juan Brito. Maybe they should turn up their headphones a couple of times to make sure they know what they're talking about. Miguel Vargas would be a good addition, though. I think that would be a nice piece in this deal. I do like Bush a little more than him. I agree with you there. But if we're just kind of casing the Dodgers system for players that are interesting, Vargas is interesting. And I don't know what you can get. I don't know if you can get multiple pieces for Bieber. Maybe it's a straight up deal, especially a guy like Bush, who's almost kind of major league ready anyway. There are a number of pitchers in that organization too. I like Carlos Duran, Christian Romero is interesting. Jared Karras, I wanted in the draft that year. That's Eric Karras' son. There's a number of interesting guys, and maybe they can bring one of them over in a trade in the offseason for one of these pitchers. And the Dodgers certainly are going to be probably scouring everywhere they can to get reliable pitching this offseason, considering their needs.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and throw out one last thought note on all of this. Is there is a world where you look at a Bush who struggled to translate, and it's a maybe they're buying low, and there could be a buy low for buy low situation, but
he's we'll get into some other together before.
Yeah, and we'll get into some other guys this offseason. He's just an interesting candidate in terms of the unproven. What is proven is that we have fantastic fans and listeners in the show. We want to thank you for tuning in daily. Remember to rate and review every single day. It helps. It's the wrong one. Sorry about that. And again, thank you all. We appreciate you being part of the Locked On Guardians team, and go Guardians go.